and there is a gap between that one, which could be about 10 seconds. But soon enough, here is the algorithm first, loading so as to be able to do this thing, and at the same time,
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. You're starting to present today. Give us good. Yes, can you hear me? Louder? Louder.
you have very, very low voice.
Yes.
You're talking to the crowd, so you can listen to yourself. So if I'm talking about this amazing interpretation, so this is how you're supposed to talk. Okay, everyone? When you are talking, you're talking to the crowd. Don't be like Elena. That's a good one. Okay? Yeah.
So do we need to copy the slides somewhere else?
All the slides are right now over there. I will just turn off the voice over here. So if you want to turn off the voice, only what you do is basically just click on this guy.
And then fade down.
Okay.
And to turn it back and check, right?
Yeah. You know what, I will put this thing over here.
Wait.
Where is the lady?
Marie?
Mari?
Yeah.
This is your drive?
Yes.
Is it over here as well?
Yeah.
The presentation?
Is
We would
it
like
this-
to put all the presentations in.
Can we get out?
Yeah.
It is the same as this one on
No,
the key?
my presentation is not there.
No, you sent me. Is it not?
Yes.
You just sent me. So I
Did
copied
you?
you.
Okay. Thank you.
Is this North Viking?
Yes.
You know what I will do? Of course, it's like, I will just in case I will copy it over.
Marie, can you take it?
The draft.
No, if I get
So
it.
yours?
Another slide?
This morning there was snow, it was snowing, and I forgot the cap.
Oh,
And it was like, okay, all the effort I took with the brush. Yeah, it gets like.
Okay, so
I watched
the
it.
presentations are here.
I was like, I didn't see it.
Remember, in case this one will restore, everything is gone.
No, not an afro. I love the.
In case
But the.
power goes down,
Oh,
whatever,
okay.
it's gonna be gone.
I
We
understand.
will have to copy it. Okay?
Another computer is the same. Somebody use me pen, please. I didn't understand this. I forget to take the pen.
Hi everyone, I am Mari and I'm going to present my work on the North Viking Graben on the North Sea. So here I'm
Hi everyone,
the principal findings.
I am Mari and I'm going to present
my work on the North Viking Graben, one of the most important petroleum systems. So here I'm
hi everyone,
the principal Kimmeridgian shell. Hydrocarbon provinces in the world, and our study area is here on the Vega field, north of the Horda platform, and it's surrounded by many fields. So acquisition of 3D seismic was took into this field. The objective is the interpretation of the interpretation of the Viking Graben for exploration of the petroleum system and assessment of the petroleum system. So the data that we have is 3D seismic. We also have three logs right here. In the logs we have gamma ray, sonic, and and density from which we build synthetics. And some of the methods and the workflow that we use is loading the data, then QCing all the wells, and then generating synthetics and well tying it to the seismic. Then using also the variance attribute to help on the aid of interpretation of faults, and we interpreted horizons. We also, the last step was creating time surfaces and then analyzing all the results. So here is a summary of the regional tectonic framework. The North Sea is an extensional margin and it underwent two rifting events. One was on the Permian to early Triassic, and the second one, which is the most important for this project, was the one that occurred in the late Jurassic to early Cretaceous. And this is the one responsible for the formation of traps in the region. As I mentioned, the most important petroleum system in the area is the Kimmeridgian Shale Total Petroleum System, and this is responsible for all the oil and gas in the in the field. So the sources are the Dropne and Heather Formation. The reservoirs are found in the Triassic to the Eocene. Seals are distributed in the post rift and in the syn rift sequences, and traps are mainly structural related to the rifting event. So the first step was QCing the well data. So some of the wells have spikes that we had to correct, and also they had gaps, so I interpolated in between the spaces. And then after the wells the well logs were corrected, I generated the synthetics. Here's the synthetic. And to match it to the seismic, it was only required like a 30 millisecond bulk shift. The seismic is American polarity, as we can see here. It's going from hard rock to soft rock, and we have a trough, so it's American polarity. And after the wells were tied, I continue with the interpretation. So these are the horizons I interpreted: Rannoch, Tarver, Dropne, Cromernall, Shetland, Rogaland, Hordaland, and the Miocene unconformity. And here are all the ages for each horizon. So faults are located on the pre and syn rift area. Tarver and Rannoch are part of the pre-rift. Dropne is the top of the syn rift. Cromernall, and then from Cromernall upward is all post-rift. Well, actually from Dropne upwards is post-rift. Faults, the ones that are the main rift faults, the ones that are bounding the blocks, have displacements of 150 to 130 milliseconds, and then there are smaller faults inside the blocks that are 5 to 20 milliseconds displacement. So these are how the time surfaces look like after all the interpretations. So we can see that the dipping of the basin changed from the east to the west as it got younger. So now to the elements of the petroleum system. So the source is the Drobne Formation. This is a very continuous horizon that extends across the whole area. It dips to the north, and the thickness ranges between 40 meters and 130 meters. And also in the boreal history, you can see that it entered the oil window, so it's mature enough to produce hydrocarbons. The reservoirs are Tarbert and Rannoch formations. These are on the pre-rift section. They are sandstones, and thicknesses vary from 80 meters to 150 meters for Tarbert and Rannoch. Rannoch is shaly in the bottom, but on the top is clean sand, and it varies from 20 to 40 meters. Seals. So the seals are part of the post-rift sequence. We have the top of Cromernal group and the Shetland group. So Cromernal has the thickness of Cromernal varies a lot between 8 meters and 180 meters, but where it's 8 meters, it has Shetland on top, which is a kilometer thick. So there's good reservoir integrity in the area. And finally, the last element is the traps. And the traps are associated, as I mentioned, with the rift event. So they are located on the faulted blocks, and we can see three high points that coincide with the well location. This is the volume of each trap, and I consider, since both of the reservoirs are stacked, I consider the thickness of both of the reservoirs together. This is the risk assessment. So for the source rock, it has DOC that is on average 5%, so it's a great source rock. It's also very extensive, and it reached the maturation. So I gave it a high mark. Reservoirs are compartmentalized, and we also don't have enough data to talk about porosity and permeability, so I gave it a 0.7. Seals are laterally extensive, and they are very thick, so it has also high mark. Traps are hard structures and possible sealing fault traps, but we don't know if the faults are migrating or sealing. So for traps it's 0.7, and then for generation, migration, and accumulation, since migration we are not sure if it happened because of the faults, then the mark is 0.8. So the total risk is actually really good, and it is highly likely that there is a hydrocarbon in the area. So the conclusions, as I mentioned, the risk is 30%. All the elements of the petroleum systems were found. The source is Drobne. Reservoirs are Tarbert and Rannoch. Traps are structural, mostly related to the fault. The fault-bounded blocks, and the seals are mainly Cromernal and Shetland, and they're very thick and laterally extensive. For recommendation, one recommendation is to generate amplitude maps to evaluate hydrocarbon anomalies or pressure anomalies. And also to integrate other data like resistivity logs, and also core descriptions of to help be more precise with the reservoir quality. References. And I'd like to thank you, University of Alberta, Professor Elena, for all the data, all the work. Olivier, thank you for your patience, and all of you guys for the support. Thank you.
Questions? I have a question.
Yes.
Did you see any place which you would recommend for other future target?
Well, I think these three. So one will be here, and the other one will be here. I mean, they're already drilled by the exploration wells, but I think these are the targets.
But the new one?
New one? No.
No. Okay.
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll switch to another one.
Just escape, close this one, find yours. There. Asking questions. Yep.
Okay. So that's good. Yeah, let's start the next one.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Leighton Houck, and I'll be talking about the Louisiana Gulf Coast in the Gulf of Mexico Basin. A quick introduction on what we were planning to do. Our objectives were to map sand horizons as well as sealing shale horizons. We then identified all the faults, determined phases of tectonic history, assessed the reservoir units for their hydrocarbon content, identified traps, and finally suggested location for drilling a well. So here you can see the area that the study area is found in. So available data was 3D seismic as well as log data from 11 wells drilled in the area, as well as available literature on the area. Our workflow began with the import of seismic data and the well data, and then now analyzing the well logs for their hydrocarbon content, picking faults, picking horizons of interest based off of reservoir and sealing units, create time structures for the maps of the reservoir and sealing units, create cross-sections through prospective areas, produce amplitude maps of the reservoir units, and finally propose a well location. Principal findings were that there were large, laterally continuous, vertically repeating Miocene deltaic sand reservoirs. These have been replaced by large-scale faults, and based on their separation and resistivity curves and deflection of the SP curve, we predicted relatively high porosity and permeability. And based on the high resistivity, they likely have some hydrocarbon content. The shale sealing layers are found within many of the sandstone reservoirs, and they're quite repeating throughout the section. And the source rocks are deeply located and a little bit below the seismic section displayed. Underlying salt and adjacent fault systems act as the hydrocarbon migration pathways, and many of the fault traps found in location, and some of the largest ones have volume of 280 million cubic meters. General background, it's an extensional basin formed during the Mesozoic. The study area is in the Oligocene-Miocene detachment province, which is characterized by large listric faults formed in the Jurassic and smaller synthetic and antithetic faults. Marine progradation then occurred over Lochlanus Jurassic salt structures, and the sediment input is mainly from Miocene slope aprons and submarine fans. This basin is mainly gas prone, but can produce oil as well. So here you can see the basement with the Lochlanus salt and the tilted fault blocks above it, and a paleodepositional environment for the Miocene in this time. So based on the seismic to wall ties, we see that the sands have a decrease in SP, which correspond to a positive reflection coefficient and a peak in the data, so we are working with American polarity. The fault's two general striking directions, northeast to southwest, as well as northwest to southeast, and fault displacement tends to increase with depth. They are large listric faults, which are formed first, and smaller synthetic and antithetic faults that were formed secondary. Here you can see a variance map that outlines the strike of the main faulting directions, as well as the increase in displacement of the faults downwards. The reservoirs found the sub-5 horizon and sub-2 horizons to be the most prospective. They have low SP, high resistivity, and a separation in the resistivity curve indicating permeability and hydrocarbon content. And so this is horizon 2 with some rather large sand bodies, and horizon 5. Both horizons see a deepening to the southeast, and normal faults are outlined by a drastic change in two-way travel time. Thickness of Horizon 5 was found to be about 110 feet, and Horizon 2 a little slimmer at 75 feet. Looking at amplitude maps of the sub-5 and sub-2 horizons, we see two areas that are common to each other with bright yellow amplitude, and this is attributed to higher amplitudes due to a higher average porosity. So these two areas are where I looked further. Looking at cross lines and inlines through those sections, we see fault traps over these areas in both the sub-2 and sub-5 horizon. And do some volumetrics with 15,000 feet of lateral closure in the inline direction and 6,000 feet in the cross line direction, with a thickness of about 110 feet in a nearby well. It gave us a volume of 280 million cubic meters of trapping area. The seal is formed by laterally continuous and repeating shale layers that occur above much of the reservoirs. So you can see a thick shale interval above the sub-5 horizon. The source rock is mainly deeper down here, where our seismic data was primarily focused up here. So these are Cretaceous and Jurassic Age rocks, and these shallower Eocene sources are also proven, but not quite as explored as the deeper ones. Hydrocarbon migration and maturity. So the migration occurred mainly along the collapsed salt structures and through the numerous faults in the area. And the maturation likely occurred from the Cretaceous through to the Tertiary. Looking at a proposed well location, I chose the area where both of the two reservoir horizons had the highest amplitude, and using one well location is able to penetrate both the sub-5 horizon as well as the sub-2 horizon. And the sub-5 sand had a target depth of approximately 10,500 feet based off of well logs from nearby wells. So risk analysis, the primary risks are the sealing and fluid transmission capabilities of the fault. So we not only need the salt faults to seal in some areas to form the fault troughs, but they also, in other areas, need to be able to transmit hydrocarbons for secondary migration. As well, the salt flanks and the collapsed salt structures must be able to flow hydrocarbons from the deeper source rocks. And further assessment of the maturity of the shallower sources would help to identify if those are mature enough to give us hydrocarbons in our reservoir. So recommendations, before drilling, determine the quantitative sealing capability of the faults, and determine if the nearby salt structures are collapsed and capable of transmitting hydrocarbons. And finally, to recommend to drill one well at the proposed location with two perforation zones that would be capable of accessing both the sub-5 and the sub-2 horizons using a single well bore, which will save a little bit of money. So I'd like to thank Schlumberger, IPG Barrel Award, and Elena and Olivier for helping with this and getting this project done. Thanks. Questions? Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Congratulations, good presentation. But I need to make you some comments.
Sure.
If you can go to the principal finding, please. Okay, when you're talking about the reservoir,
Yeah.
you mentioned that the porosity is likely good as seen by resistivity curve separation and deflection in SP curve. Porosity is not determined by that logs, you know?
Yeah, maybe should have been
Be
current.
careful about that, because you can have an idea about the permeability of the reservoir with these kind of logs, you know? When you have separation between the resistivity curve, it means that you have invasion. And if you have invasion, it means that you have permeability in the formation, and because of that, you will have the separation in the resistivity curve. And the SP, when you have a deflection in the SP, is another indication of permeability. But careful, because porosity is determined by other logs.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that hydrocarbon likely present by resistivity curve separation, you can determine hydrocarbon not because of the separation of the curves, it's because if the resistivity is high.
Yeah, it's poorly worded. Yeah.
We can continue later.
Yeah,
Okay. So I have a short question.
Yeah.
Do you consider any risk drilling along or close across the fault? Because like the target you suggested is going across the fault.
Yeah.
So is there any drilling risk related to that?
It might be a little harder to drill through. I don't know if your drill would want to maybe follow the fault a little easier, or you would, if,
Okay.
I don't know exactly, but.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
What is it? Can I start?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I will talk about the Louisiana Gulf Coast of Mexico again, and well, this will be a different approach than yesterday. So feel free to ask at the end. The Gulf Coast basin is located in the Gulf of Mexico, in the part of the United States, close to the Permian Basin and the Armor Basin. The reserves of gas that they have is about 196.2 cubic feet. 70% of them are proved developed, 26 of oil and 44 of natural gas, and the current net production is about 33.9 millions of CFED. Well, the data sets and the workflow. What we did for the project, I did a background information with a further reading about the basin, the seismic interpretation that was about the location of the data set, the QC, the seismic well type, the horizon interpretations, the structural interpretation, the faulting and salt tectonics, the surface creations, two-way time maps, some attribute maps, and the results is about the results of the interpretation, the drill targets, the reservoir prospects, the risk factors, conclusions, and recommendations. Some data sets are the background data, the papers, articles, 11 wells, one well with the DT, and the seismic survey. Well, I will talk fast about this part. The basin has a very structural style complexity, so we will have a lot of district faults, some synthetic faults, and antithetic faults in this part. During the early Jurassic, we'll have some uprifting, and after that we'll have another one on the salt. And the main feature is about the thermal sagging and the deposition, about the deltaic sediments and turbidite sediments also, and the salt displacement in the Oligocene to the Pleistocene, if I remember good. So first we measure the polarity, and I measured the polarity, and I inferred that it was an American polarity. We use some well logs to make just an estimation about the resistivity, but just estimation with the gamma ray, SP, and the resistivity. The maximum flooded surface was interpreted here. As we can see, there's the listic faults here, some antithetic, synthetic faults, and the salt emplacement or the diapirs. For the maximum flooded surface, the number 2, we have almost the same tendency with the faults affecting the whole area, but well, yes, and the reflections. And the maximum flowing surface tree, we will have also like lateral continuity, but it will be affected by the faults. I want to make emphasis about this. Well, sorry, I will tell about that later. The reservoir prospect, that it will be between the listric faults, and they will form some rollover anticlines, and we will have it here also. Here we have the heights of the maps of the two-way time maps. The reservoir 2 prospect, that we will be controlled by the faulting also, and the turbidites. For the turbidites, I use some attribute that is the RMS, just to infer also, and we'll have a kind of a better idea of how the turbidites were there. And the turbidites were above the well data, and above the turbidite 2 above data from the turbidite 1. The interpretation was more complex because of the salt, and it was limited due to the salt diapirs also. To make the estimation of the salt, I use another attribute, cosine. I don't remember the complete name, but it was about cosine. Well, sorry, I don't remember the complete name. And we can see the distribution of the salt in this part of the basin. Well, more than 20 faults were interpreted for the project. This is the variance and the 3D model of the faults. We can kind of see the relationship between the listric faults and the salt that is in place here. For the reservoir 1, as I consult the papers before, I assume that the best reservoirs would be related to the faulting and to some rollover anticlines. And well, the estimation of some well logs inferred also like a good reservoir. And we can see also some stratigraphic traps that are for the turbidites, and another ones here, because also even this is like a structural trap, it works as a stratigraphic trap because of the positional conditions that were at that moment. Well, after the deformation, some deformation, it became a stratigraphic trap. Here we can see the amplitude maps of the reservoirs and the turbidites. For the turbidites is kind of more complex because of the chaotic architecture that the turbidites have. We can get confused about how are the heights, and so we need to take care about that. Well, take care about this, and don't be so confident about the amplitude map. And well, the assessment of risks and uncertainties. The salt that is below the area tends to reduce the resolution of the seismic. The attributes used for the turbidites could give a wrong idea about the geometry of the flow bodies. The faults are difficult at the hour. Well, this is at the hour when you are drilling. If you need to know about if the faults are completely active or not active, so it will be like a challenge if you have some active faults there, even if you have a reservoir close. The BSP should be utilized in some parts, in some wells, should be implemented. The conclusions is that the soil originated some listric faultings and some secondary fault systems. The soil is the detachment for the listric faults. The traps are stratigraphic and structural traps, and I estimate 2 reservoirs that are sand bodies related to deltaic environments, with potential presence of hydrocarbons. My recommendation is a better seismic acquisition or processing in the area, and the top horizon should, oh, forget about this one, I forgot to delete, sorry. And well, I want to acknowledge to the Professor Elena, to Olivier, that for the patience and the willing of help us always. And that's it, thank you.
One short question.
Oh, yes.
If anyone have, no?
You have one of your attributes. Can you switch to your attribute maps?
Yes.
Any of them. What does the cosine phase attribute actually measures?
Well,
How can you use it to detect the salt or to resolve the salt?
well, it gives you more. I don't actually remember very well, but while I was doing the project, I was it was difficult for me to see the salt, so I was looking for a much better techniques. So in some papers, I read that the cosine was a good one. Well, you can mix another ones in order to have a better result, but I don't know. I don't remember how it works. Like
No, in terms of your interpretation, how it did help you to distinguish salt from not salt
well, it.
visibly?
Oh yes, well, it helps me a lot. Well, I know.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's.
Now we have to switch to Altair. Thank you.
Sorry.
So let's start the next one.
Hey everyone, my name is Zhizhao Li and I'm presenting the 3D seismic interpretation in the Louisiana Gulf. So the introduction, this project involves 3D seismic interpretation in the Oligomycin detachment province in the Louisiana Gulf Coast, and I examined the potential petroleum systems including the reservoir, source rocks, seal and traps, and the tectonic phases will be determined by conducting structural interpretations, and the results will be compared with regional tectonics. So the regional tectonics, the Louisiana Gulf Coast was underlain by a large salt sheet. During Oligocene to Miocene, there was large amount of sediments loading from the depot center, which is in the present day the Louisiana, and the progradated basinward, and huge sediment progradation caused the salt detachment and substance, which was balanced by salt withdrawal and evacuations. Therefore, series of lithic growth faults was formed and is deeping into the basin, and a large amount of sediments were deposited on the detachment. So the data set available for this project includes a 3D seismic cube in time that covers the study area, and we have 11 wells with well log data, and we only have one well that contains a DT log. And we also have well heads and well tops. As for workflow, I firstly estimated lithology by looking at different logs and determine the sand levels. And then I examined the provided seismic well tie and to determine the polarity used. And then to locate all the interested horizons in the seismic cross sections, and to pick all the horizons I want, and pick all the faults that I can identify. Then make structural interpretations by examining cross sections and making surfaces. So polarity determination. As you can see at the red arrow, the interface from shale, which has high SP, into sandstone with low SP, corresponds to a positive reflection coefficient. Therefore, the sandstone has higher acoustic impedance. And that same interface is found as peak along the well, which indicates American polarity was used. So maximum flooding surfaces are picked as trough, and reservoirs are picked as peak. So, according to Stover et al., the source rock in this region are the lower tertiary upper Cretaceous and the upper Jurassic intervals. The sealing units are the maximum flooding surfaces, which are shale layers, and the reservoirs here are sand bodies in the well-controlled intervals and the turbidites in the deeper areas. So in this project, I totally picked 3 maximum flooding surfaces, 2 reservoir surfaces, 2 turbidites, and 1 salt layer. So hydrocarbon presence. Hydrocarbon presence in the well-controlled intervals can be determined by resistivity logs. For example, in this log, or in this well, there are separations between shallow and deep resistivity just below this horizon 5. Here you can see, which indicates potential hydrocarbon presence. So a peak reflection just below the horizon 5 in this well was picked as a potential reservoir. In the same way, another reservoir was picked at horizon 2 in the well 1726. Then I picked all the horizons I'm interested in and make the surface maps. First is the surface map for reservoir. As you can see, the reservoir is deeping into the southeast with several structural heights in the west, and the reservoirs are cut by faults, and the displacement along the faults might have caused a reservoir compartmentalization. And then I make the amplitude map for the reservoir. And because we know in this horizon we have a hydrocarbon indication in the well, 1653, and this well was located at a structural high area. So we know that hydrocarbon accumulation is most likely to be around this well, so it's higher amplitude. Then I made the surface map for turbidite. The turbidite surface is deeper at 2 sides, which is corresponding to the mound pattern that I found in the seismic profile. And the turbidites are also cut by faults. And maximum flooding surfaces are acting as potential sealing units. It is deeping from northwest to southeast, which is the same trend as reservoir, and is also cut by faults. The salt layers is located below 5,000 milliseconds in the seismic profile and is picked at the base. And you can see southeast the progradation of salt, and it can also act as a potential seals because salt has very, very low permeability. And then made the surface map for the salt, and you can see some bumps or structural heights in the west to east direction. And in total, 13 faults were picked and were identified and picked, with 3 major lithic growth faults, and the most smaller faults are in opposite direction with the major growth lithic faults. The average offset along the faults was measured about 50 milliseconds, and all those faults can be act as migration pathways for hydrocarbons. And as for traps, rollover anticlines and fault traps are the structural traps here. And in the deeper area, you have facies change that provides stratigraphic traps for the turbidite mounts. Also, in some cases, fault is also trapping the turbidite reservoir at one side. And from the only DT log we have, I determined the velocity here is about 10 feet per milliseconds. So I calculated the average trap size as about 2.8 times 10 to the 11th cubic feet. And the principal findings here, the reservoirs are deltic sand units in the well-controlled intervals and the turbidites in the deeper areas. Maximum flooding surfaces shales are acting as sealing units, and the salt might also be considered as seal in the deeper areas. Rollover anticlines and the fault-bounded traps are the main trapping mechanisms. And the possible drilling targets are the west side of the reservoir or at the mount of the turbidites. So some recommendations. Core logging can be applied at fault intervals to quantitatively measure the sealing capacity of faults, and some real cores, if possible, could be taken below the area below 3,200 milliseconds when overpressure is present. And always seismic survey with higher resolution can always increase the accuracy of the interpretations. Here's the reference, and I would like to thank Elena and Olivia for helping us, and I would like to thank Schlumberger for providing the patrol software. So, thank you.
Thank you. Question? No questions.
I have a question. You calculated your reservoir size.
The trap size.
The trap size.
Yes.
In your opinion, is that a large trap or a small trap? How would you characterize it?
I think the numbers are pretty big.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have 5 minutes of coffee
Well, you have to
break,
think about your
right?
data. Figure it out.
I had a separate sheet.
It's okay,
It's all good.
we got papers.
I got paper. All fine.
Let's start the next one.
No, I don't. I just don't sleep. And I went home
Okay. Please start.
Hi, my name is Keon, and today I'm going to be doing assignment 3, the reconnaissance exploration of the offshore Taranaki Basin in New Zealand. So, just an overview: the Taranaki Basin is a deep water basin. It's like the play is a prograding delta over a thick succession of synreef and late reef sediments. The estimated reserves are 50 billion barrels of oil. Primary geologic setting is that it's a rift basin on the back arc location of the Mesozoic Gondwana margin, and the reservoirs are your Farewell, North Cape, and Rakapi, Paleocene, Pliocene, shallow marine, transgressive silicic plastics. Your source rocks are your North Cape and Rakapi, so your North Cape and Rakapi are source and reservoir rocks. The TOC in these are 10%. Your seals are your neogene mudstones. You have seals in your transgressive and regressive mudstones in this basin. Your migration is unconfirmed, but likely up basement terminating faults and along bedding planes. The traps are structural, related to your rifting and related to some inversion that we'll see in the basin. And the timing is that the hydrocarbons started generating in the Cretaceous, so all the traps formed after that, and so they filled as they were after they were formed. So the objective of this project is to use 2D seismic data to do a reconnaissance survey of the offshore Taranaki Basin to determine your source, reservoir, seal formations, and to identify traps, and also to infer your maturation and timing of the hydrocarbon generation. What we have, and also to recommend locations for exploration drilling. So the data set is 29 seismic lines, 13 wells. 4 of these have sonic logs, and 11 wells with check shots. We also have the well tops and some GIS maps to go along. Methodology, I consulted literature, then we QC'd the data, seismic well tie, and then structural interpretation to look at traps. So the tectonic framework, I got this from the literature. It's 3 main phases. We have rifting in the late Cretaceous. Then we have very long period of sedimentation from the late Cretaceous to the Cenozoic. And then we have Miocene subduction zone, which would have this caused the emplacement of volcanics. And then we had the introduction of inversion tectonics in the basin, in the Neogene, after all that. So the main hydrocarbon field in my area is a Tui oil field. That's here. We also have the Pokura oil field in the area. So I'll focus on Tui. The reserves in this field are 50 million, and the production is 50,000 barrels a day roughly, and good quality reservoirs. So back to my basin as a whole, I first QC'd my seismic data, so I QC'd for well top consistency. Then I QC'd the check shots to make sure they were all increasing with depth. Then I looked for horizons with hydrocarbon indicators. Next, I determined the polarity and phase. I determined that the polarity was American polarity, just based on the seabed being a positive reflection and the basement being positive, and the phase was 0 phase. Then I extracted my wavelet, did seismic well ties on my 4 wells with sonic logs. Then I did seismic well tie on the Romney well, which is one without a check shot and only the sonic log. Then I determined from literature what my key horizons would be that I wanted to map, and then I determined the polarity of these for the study. So I also overlaid the wells that only had check shots just to QC the pics and make sure my well ties were accurate. Then I did mistie analysis, and I analyzed for vertical, phase, and gain misties. So this is the after. You watch the seabed. See, it's really improved after mistie analysis. Then I did the flattening of the seabed. I needed to do this because the deep canyons in the sea floor created a pushdown effect, and the velocities from testing I determined was 1,800 meters per second was the accurate flattening. So I flattened that, and then we went on to structural interpretation. So the first trap, I have 4 of them. The first trap is the only trap with the Moki sandstone as the trap. So here is where this line is, and the basin is getting deeper as we go landward. So I think the source, the North Cape and the Rakapi, are coming from here and then migrating into the Moki sandstones. So the volume of this trap is 3,500 meters by 26 milliseconds, and we had some DHIs in this region as well, so I think this is a good trap to target. The other trap is more to the north of the first one, and also we have the basin deepening landward again, so I think the size, the reservoirs here are the Farewell, North Cape, and Rakapi, and so the source is also the North Cape and Rakapi again. So the basin is deepening, so I think the hydrocarbons are coming from the east all the way up to these reservoirs. We have 4-way dip closure here and 4th dip closure, and again, DHIs. And the biggest closure here was on the North Cape Formation, and it's in this 4th closure, so I think that is the better closure to target in this region. One thing about this T2 trap was that I found that there may be some lateral connectivity, because a line a little south of it has the same style of trapping, and the volume of the traps were similar. So that could be indicative of some lateral continuity in the area. Trap 3 was further to the west, and this one was the first trap that I saw inversion tectonics in. Again, we have DHIs. The reservoirs are North Cape, Farewell, Rakapi, and I think we see here the basin is getting deeper, again to the southeast. So I think the hydrocarbons are coming up here and into the reservoirs. So these would be good traps. Again, we have an extension of this trap to the south of it. So similar style and similar volumes. The highest volume is in the Farewell, just because it's at the top of this inversion structure. The 4th trap is another pop-up structure that I found, but I don't think it's related because these are the original ones and the faults have a different orientation. The volumes here were about 6,000 meters width and 23 milliseconds thickness. In the Farewell is the biggest one again. Same reservoirs, same source, same seals, just in a different location. So that's my 4 traps that I found from my reconnaissance survey. And I found that the source was mainly in the rift section. My reservoirs, they seem to always be reservoir seal pairs, and they were associated with your long sedimentation through the Cretaceous to Cenozoic. Your traps were developed. You have 2 different types of traps. One's alongside your rifting in the Cretaceous, and one's alongside your inversions in the late Cretaceous to Paleocene. Your seals are transgressive, regressive, and these go from your late Cretaceous all the way to the Cenozoic. Migration again, detachment, basement detached folds, and the timing is from the Cretaceous to present. So I think all the elements of your petroleum system are in place in this reservoir, and that some of the risks involved is that we did not have well control because there are a few wells deep in the basin. So that will be one of the key things we need to do, like limit the uncertainty in terms of these traps. Like really, we need to get the validity of those DHIs that we saw, make sure that they actually hydrocarbon indicators. And also, the basin is a frontier basin and the reservoirs are pretty deep. So one thing we have to worry about is your reservoir quality. You may have like cementation because it's over 4.5 kilometers deep. Conclusions, all the reservoir elements are in place, and I was able to get all the details from this reconnaissance survey. Recommendations would be to do infill seismic, either more 2D lines or 3D seismic if we can afford, to better delineate these traps. And also, I thought it would be a good idea to perform basin modeling to understand if these sources even generated commercial reserves in the first place, because that would determine if it was worth drilling the traps. So thank you. I would like to thank these people, Helena, Schlumberger, IPG, Olivier, and these are my references. So that's it. I'll take questions now.
I have one too.
Yeah, you can ask. No, you
Okay.
can still ask.
Okay, have you tried any other wavelet? And what, you,
Oh,
you said,
a wavelet for each well.
yeah, but have you tried any other type of wavelet?
No,
Why not?
because the assignment said use extended.
And how big was your, did you have any systematic shift from synthetic to your well?
Oh,
During the well time?
I had to like stretch and squeeze a lot.
What does a lot mean? How many milliseconds?
I'd say like 50.
Okay, is that,
It was accurate in like some regions, but then like it wouldn't match like the basement, so to make it in the Tane it was fine, which is like
what could be an explanation for that?
Can you give me 5 seconds to think about it?
Yeah, sure. I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Robert. Today I will be talking about the Louisiana Gulf Coast seismic interpretation. This is the location of the data set. The Louisiana Gulf Coast is located in the Oligocene-Miocene detachment province, and this is the location of the area. This data set is located in a reef basin where it's like in a shallow water in the south of Louisiana. Here, a little bit of introduction. This basin had been through different rifting process, then salt tectonic, and then thermal sagging. Here is the data set that we use. We use the IBA data set that it has 11 well, 1 Sony log, and the rest was like 11 well distributed in the 3 seismic cube. And we have SP log, resistivity log, so that helps a lot when we're going to do the interpretation. Here was the method and workflow that we use for the interpretation. We put the data set, the location data set, QC of the data. We start the statistical wavelet, synthetic generation, seismic well type, horizon interpretation, structural interpretation, volumetric frame creation, and then the volume attributes. Well, the workflow, we import all the data, we did the QC, we check all we did the QC of the well logs, make sure that everything was correct, that the tops were in good, and we looked at the main logs. We put the formation well tops to see that there was no, to do like some kind of a QC of the well logs, that everything was correct. And then we start to generate the synthetic. We use the statistical wavelet for this interpretation. And then here is the tectonic, regional tectonic framework. You can see here in the late Jurassic, what the kind of the position that we had in this marine basin. In the early Cretaceous, we have the clastic gradation. Then the early Cretaceous, we have the development of the rim carbonate shelf. In the late Cretaceous, we have the mid-clastic carbonate aggradation in the continent margins. Resurgence the Paleogene, Miocene provadation, basin filling, and then late Geocene climatic static influence provadation along the central Gulf margin. Here we have the well logs. We use the SP like to serve trying to isolate the sandy layer from the shales. Keep always that with the SP we can find to have at least the permeable layers separated from the impermeable layers. And also with the resistivity log, we can separate more or less what are the hydrocarbons present in this area. During the interpretation, it was our task to pick 2 maximum flowing surfaces, 2 reservoirs, and 2 turbidite. In this case, we have a maximum flowing surface that is extend most of the area, and as we use the American polarity, where the wave go from soft to hard, we have like a peak. So that's the reason we have like this kind of reflection. And we have this is the surface that we got when we did the time map, and here is the horizon of this maximum flooding surface in the area. And also here in the log, we can see the peak of this maximum flooding surface. Very similar to this one as well. It's another maximum flooding surface. We can see in 3D distribution and the extension, the surface, and also where it matched there with the resistivity and the SP in the data set. Here is my sun horizon. Here we can see where is located in the data set location. We can see what is located here in the well logs, plus here we have the amplitude map that we did for this reservoir. In this one here is my other sun horizon with the time map, and also the location in the well logs, plus the location in the seismic. This is the XLI 950, and also in the well logs. I don't know if you guys can see the well name, but this is the location that I picked. This is my other sun horizon. This one here is my turbidite horizon. There is the surface that I made for the turbidite, and there is the turbidite amplitude map that I did, and there is the surface and the location in the area. This is the other turbidite horizon that is also assigned this assignment, plus the surface in 3D, what is the location in the data set, and also the amplitude map that is related to this horizon. Here is the sol horizon. I use, as Enrique and other students, the same cosine phase inside attribute that allow us to see the instantaneous phase, the change, where you have because the salt is like a little bit, has a very rare behavior within the seismic. It's very difficult. So using this kind of attribute, we can isolate what different of continuity of the seismic reflection. You can see the difference if you look at here from this part here or this part here. What is the change in the reflections? Here is my fault. You can see the main fault that I picked there, the synthetic fault, the antithetic fault, and this Lister fault that is there. But in this case, I use in Petrel something that is clean fault, and you can have at least the nice shape and extension of the fault to the data set. Here is my petroleum system. You can see the source rock, the seal. The seal rock is a maximum flooding surface. There is a fault in the other side that is at the same time control the migration and also seal the reservoir. Here is 2 target wells that I marked according to the amplitude map of the generated for the reservoir. I use this area here because I consider that it has a good reflection according to the amplitude map, and I said, well, there were also other wells not far away from this one, so that was kind of a opportunity to put those areas as a target well. And well, as you can see here, the main, the source rock, and that is the main source rock for this kind of petroleum system. The migration is up deep. The seal is a maximum flooding surface, and well, this is the main elements of the petroleum system. Here, this is my other reservoir. The same. There is a fault. Here is the horizon that I picked, and I propose this well in the amplitude map because I consider there was a good area there a good target to put to drill that area according to the amplitude map. here is the tectonic history, and we can see like how it's connected the lister fault with the salt in that area, and of course the antithetic fault and the synthetic fault development that develop within this data set. The traps, I did the calculation for one trap, more or less. This is the number that I got, the thickness, and I think it's not a big number compared with other guys, but this is what I found. This is the assessment of risk and authenticated that I have during this interpretation. I found that during my interpretation, the turbidites were very difficult to pick, and also the salt to the data set, because it's the reflection in some part of the turbidite is a little bit dim, and also in the salt is very difficult with the reflection. You can get it very lost during interpretation very easy. It's the same with the turbidite. When you're trying to trace the horizon, it's very easy to get lost or lost the continuity, and for that reason, it's better sometimes to use the attribute to do a better job. And another risk that I found is for drilling this area, because we don't know exactly where we can have the good reservoir due the quality, due to the salt and all those things. So we propose, as a conclusion, we have like a well-developed fault system in this zone associated with the salt diapatism. We have two types of salt trap present in this zone, that's the graphic, turbidite, and the tectonic, the rollover anticline. The main source rock is organic rich carbonate mass and marine shale depositing during the Jurassic and Cretaceous. The main oil migration pathway of the reservoir is along the faults and is up deep and accumulate in a stable horizon. The reservoir, mainly topology, according to the SP log, is a sandstone, and it has a good permeability. And the position and environment in general is deltaic, but there are some estuaries and turbidites. My recommendation is for the future, for this assignment, is instead of providing like simple horizon, at least to have some names to do better interpretation. And in some part when we're doing that, the top of this horizon were displaced, so which it was a little bit difficult for the interpretation. And provide like a better correlation and interpretation. These are my reference that I used during my investigation. And thanks to all those good people that help me all the time, Olivier, professor, and all the IPG students for their help.
Asking question, but next student please come, because we really out of time here.
Do you know the lateral extent of the trap that you chose?
I used just in between the.
So you had
from the
height and the width.
Yeah.
You know how far?
No. I didn't do too much better.
I'm going to talk about the Taranaki Basin in New Zealand. Let's start with introduction. The Taranaki Basin is a rift basin formed during late Cretaceous. It is located in the west, near the west coast of New Zealand. It covers roughly 100,000 kilometer square area in the offshore part, and is the only source of commercial oil and gas production in New Zealand. Most of the commercial production takes place in the Neogene formations, but there are the reservoirs of Paleogene and late Cretaceous age, and the objective of this assignment is to study those reservoirs. This is the general stratigraphy of this basin. For this assignment, 29 2D seismic lines, 13 well data, 11 wells with check shots, well tops, well logs, well heads, and trajectories, and GIS maps were provided. The main three producing fields in this basin are Tui, Pohokura, and Kora basin. The data provided covers the Tui and Kora field. The Kora field is around here, and the Tui field is here. This is the Pohokura basin, but the seismic lines do not extend up to there. This is the seafloor map. Okay, here in this image the fields are shown. The workflow, first of all I coordinated and did the verification of coordinates and units in the project file, then imported the 2D seismic data along with MISTI. I did QC of 2D seismic data and conducted MISTI analysis. Then the determination of seismic polarity, then running the seismic well type for wells Tane, Kora, Riki, Taranga, using corresponding check shots and seismic lines. The synthetic generation for these wells by extracting wavelets from the corresponding seismic lines. Adjustment of synthetic seismograms to fit the seismic data using bulk shift and stretch and squeeze. Flattening of seismic line to the horizon with replacement velocity in interpretation window to minimize push down effect using seafloor surface. And the last step, picking the horizons of interest through seismic data for further interpretation. These are the images of synthetic generation for Taranga well and Tane well. And this is the flattened seismic with velocity 1800 amperes. The regional tectonic framework. The Taranaki basin is a Cretaceous and tertiary sedimentary basin. It lies at the southern end of a rift that developed subparallel to Tasman Sea Rift during Cretaceous, which now separates Australia and New Zealand. Structure of the basin has been controlled by movement along Taranaki and Cape Egmont fault zones. These are the fault zones. The subsidence commenced in the Cretaceous and continued until Pliocene. The predominant tectonic regime in the basin changed from one of extension to compression in early Miocene. Late tertiary tectonics formed the three primary structural types: faulted anticlines, high angle overthrust structure, and tilted fault blocks. This is the tectonic history of the basin. Now structural interpretation. For the structural interpretation, I mapped three main horizons of interest. The first of all, three continuous horizons were mapped. Those are the Ariki Formation, Turi Formation, and Vainu Formation. After that, three prospective reservoirs and source rock were mapped. Those are Moki Sandstone, Farewell Sandstone, and North Cape Formation. The Farewell and North Cape Formation have fairly good lateral continuity, and average thickness was of 100 to 150 millisecond and 150 to 200 millisecond in two-way time, respectively. On the other hand, Moki Sandstone was very inconsistent in appearance with great variation in thickness. In this image, In this image, we can see the formations horizon as mapped, and this is these are the faults present in this section, and this is the seismic line. And the last map horizon was the Kora volcanics. It is a structural horizon that created uplift and formed a trap here for hydrocarbons. This trap affected the Moki formation. So there are several structural traps present in this system. They are 4-way or 3-way dip closures, fault closures, basement horsts, etc. Most of these structural traps were observed near the Kora field, and in this figure, this is one of the structural traps. It is a normal fault with compression that creates anticline in the beds along the downthrow side. This fault mainly affects the farewell formation. This is the farewell formation, and as you can see, along this part there is a ceiling trap occurs because of this fault. This trap is at depth of 1300 to millisecond and extends to 3750 milliseconds deep. Risk assessment and recommendation. The main risk assessment I found in this area was these Kora volcanics. Because of these volcanics, in a lot of seismic lines, this sort of noisy region was seen, and in many seismic lines, this region was extended in a very large area. So, and because of that, the interpretation was difficult. And the recommendation would be that better seismic data and other log data such as density and core log should be studied in this region to correct this error, and further exploration in the target traps should be conducted. Conclusion, from the study of reservoir horizons, it was noted that these reservoirs gave strong negative amplitude near possible structural traps or uplifts. The resistivity log also showed the increased resistivity in such trapped regions for these reservoirs. So it is safe to conclude that these reservoirs had potential prospects, and further exploration should be done for production purposes.
Thank you.
So, since we only had 2D seismic to work with, how did you determine that there was 3D closure around your traps?
I could not show it in this presentation, but there was near Kora field here. See, these seismic lines are very closely packed, right? So in this section here and this section here, the faults and the reservoir amplitude was it is my personal interpretation, but it seemed that it went in this sort of structure, and surrounding which there was that seemed high amplitude in the reservoir. So it's possible that there was a trap there. But that's my.
I had a similar question. Could you explain the difference between a 4-way closure and 3-way closure?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think four-way closure would be like a dome, and three-way would be like 3 sides instead of 4 sides.
What happens on the fourth side?
Sorry?
What happens on the fourth side?
I'm not sure.
So, do you have like other structure, like fault on the other side? Or?
Could be.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Xinchen Luo. Today I'm going to present the seismic interpretation for Louisiana Gulf Coast. So this study area is the Louisiana Gulf Coast in the Oligocene Miocene Detachment Province, Gulf of Mexico, and the objective of this study is to make the interpretation of the potential petroleum system in this area. So the background. The Oligocene to Miocene Detachment Province contains down to the basin district growth faults and thick deltic sediments. And firstly, the salt sheet was extruded, and progradation of the shelf margin caused differential loading and salt movement. And the evacuation of salt balanced the extensional tectonics and subsidence, and as the sedimentation and tectonics occurred at the same time, the district growth formed, and they are often associated with the structure traps. So here is the data set. The data set includes a 3D seismic cube and 11 wells with well logs, and also recommended literatures. So here is the workflow. First, I consult the literature and well data to determine the reservoirs, sealing units, source rocks, and coefficient, and also to the so the priority is positive. Therefore, the top of sand is the peak and top of shale is trough. So for the horizons, I picked 3 maximum flooding surface, 2 sandstone reservoirs within the well control, and 2 turbidites below the well control, and also the salt surface, and also to the peak. So therefore, the reservoirs within the well control, we can see shale is one section window that the separation so for the horizons, I picked 3 maximum deep and shallow resistivity, 2 sandstone permeable zone, and reservoir. Also, the resistivity is high, and it indicates the hydrocarbon presence. And one can be found in the well just below the horizon 5, and another can be found in another well just below the horizon 2. And for the reservoirs below the well control, they were picked by the presence of mounds. So for the reservoirs within the well control, I generated the 2D surface map and amplitude map, and they are dipping from northwest to southeast, and generally lateral continuous, but also cut by some faults, and displacement occurred along the faults. And from the amplitude map, we can see that the wells have hydrocarbon that sits on the bright spot, and it also corresponds to the structure high area. So for the reservoirs below the well control, they are turbidites indicated by the mounds, and they are not continuous and bounded by the 2 major faults. They become good isolated sand bodies for hydrocarbon accumulation and also form structure high area. For sealing units, they are maximum flooding surfaces. They have good continuity and gently dipping from northwest to southeast, and they also capped by some major force, and displacement also occurred. And those thick units above the reservoirs provide good seals for hydrocarbon. And the salt was manually picked because the reflection are weak and noisy. And it's along with the lower part of the Listric fault. And it forms the two-structure high iron in the 2D map. And it provides good seals for the petroleum system. For the faults, 19 faults were picked, including 3 major Listric faults, and also some normal faults. And displacement varies in places, and it can be up to about 100 milliseconds. And the sealing capacity would be good when the large displacement occurred along faults and the reservoirs were confined. And those faults could also become migration pathways to migrate the hydrocarbon upward to shallow reservoirs. And the traps, the structure traps are the fault traps, rollover anticlines, and also bump of salt together with the Listric fault. And their size are about 31 billion cubic feet. And stratigraphic traps are the isolated faces of turbidite, and the faces changes from the turbidite to the other lithologies makes the good traps. So the tectonic history interpreted is correspond to the literature, and some other information could be the source rock of the petroleum system at the Jurassic, Cretaceous, and Eocene organic carbon-rich rocks, and the timing of oil explosion in the Eocene source was about 10 MA, which is after the formation of trap and the migration pathway, making this petroleum system relatively good. So for the reservoirs within the well control, they were structurally compartmentalized, and for the reservoirs below the well control, they are stratigraphically compartmentalized. Some principal findings. The petroleum system in the Louisiana Gulf are successful and worth for exploration, and the reservoirs are deltaic sand units and isolated turbidites, and the continuous maximum flooded surface provide good seals, and fault traps, rollover anticlines, and faces changes provide good traps. The timing of oil explosion in the Eocene source is later than the formation of traps and migration pathway, and the drilling targets would be the northwest part, where the structure high and high amplitude area. Some recommendations. The petroleum system in the Louisiana Gulf is successful and worth for the study, and there are some risks associated with the interpretation for the compartmentalization. So co-logging can be conducted to quantify the sealing capacity of the faults. And also there are some risks for the interpretation below the intervals, for the intervals below the 3200 milliseconds. So co-logging can also be conducted to examine those intervals. Here are the references, and I would like to thank Dr. Elena and Oliver for the support throughout the project. I would also like to thank the IPG and the U of A for providing the dataset, and Schlumberger for providing the lessons of software. Thank you.
Two questions. What kind of attribute did you use to pick the faults? And then the second part of the question is, what does it measure?
Okay. I used the variance map.
Yeah. And how does that work?
Well, like those those lines indicates the track of the faults. So I just.
But what does the algorithm detect when you run that algorithm?
I just used inline across this area, and and just from here I can see the seismic, and here indicates the faults, and I pick it and then I move the inline to the next place.
Okay, yeah, that's not exactly what I meant. I was like, do you know what the variance algorithm detects in your on your seismic line or in your seismic cube?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We will not have a break, so we will just continue because we are.
I'm asking too many questions. Sorry, guys.
No, keep asking.
No, it measures the change in steepness.
Yeah.
Steepness and also gap in amplitudes. And how software developers does.
Yeah,
they have zero, it's a fault, we have one.
Let's put it on the end.
No, I just work on this because that's why.
Stella?
Yeah.
Get out of the passenger. Just close it and just close it and you will see here is
Okay.
just put
Okay, we're going to be going over the Gulf Coast again. This is in Gulf of Mexico, just south of the United States, off the coast of Louisiana. We'll do seismic interpretation using Petrel. So this is an introduction. This is our study area down here, kind of central Louisiana, just off the coast. It's in the Oligocene-Miocene technostratigraphic province. So basically the Jurassic salt is migrated in between the Oligocene and Miocene deposits. And our basin's above the salt and Miocene to current stratigraphy. So the objective of this study was to determine the structural geology of the area as well as locate and assess potential hydrocarbon reservoirs in both sands and in well control and in our turbidite sands. And we used Petrel to identify the maximum flooding surfaces as well as faults and any local structures within the study area, to locate sand bodies within the well logs as well as potential reservoirs in the turbidites out of our well control. And then assess them for their lateral thickness and lateral variation. So the principal findings, in my research, I found two potential sandstone reservoirs. These had high negative SP, so they were permeable. They had high resistivity as well, which indicates hydrocarbons, as well as some separation from the high and low resistivity, also indicating they're permeable units. We looked at bright spots within these two intervals, these two sandstones, and then identified two traps within these, in normal traps as well as a rollover anticline, but I'm only going to be presenting the normally faulted trap. As well, we looked below our well control in turbidites. So we identified these using basically the shape or outline to identify them in the subsurface. So those are down below our well control. This is our first trap. And the traps in these turbidite packages can be turbidite lobe traps, stratigraphic traps. You can get rollover anticline traps and lister traps. So the trap I found was a stratigraphic trap. And I identified one target location within these turbidites that is a potential reservoir and drilling location. So in doing the structural interpretation for our study area, I identified 3 maximum flooding surfaces. 2 of them can be seen on our well logs over here, and they correspond to higher SPs. And these also corresponded in our seismic to high negative reflection coefficients or troughs. So our polarity of our seismic was positive American Standard polarity. And so these are the 3 maximum flooding surfaces I identified. Maximum flooding surface 1, 2, and 3. They get higher as the number increases. And as you can see, the faults on these are where we see the greatest offset and change in time depth on the maximum flooding surfaces. And as you go deeper in the strata, the offsets becomes greater from the faulting. So just go over some tectonic history. The basic thing in this basin is we have Jurassic salts and large amounts of sediment coming in from the North America, piling on. In our study area, our salt rests in between, like I said, between the Oligocene and the Miocene. So the strata we have here goes from we have salt down here, and then we go into the Miocene deposits, and then the Plio-Pleistocene deposits on the top. Because we have salt and high sedimentation rates, we get detachment faulting along the salt, creating growth faults and listric faults, which is blue here and green here as well. And along with these faults, because we have an extensional regime caused by lots of sediment loading, we also get a lot of synthetic and antithetic faults that are relating to our main listric faults. And then along here, we can see our two sand regions, and as well as our three maximum flooding surfaces. These just help delineate how much offset we are getting on the faults. And down here, we just have active faulting. While we're getting sedimentation in deep water, we get turbidite deposits. So for the reservoirs that I identified two sandstone reservoirs, sandstone 1 and sandstone 2. Sandstone 1 was the one that I looked at for a trap. I actually did look at these, but I'm not going to include that in our presentation. But they corresponded. Actually, I'll show you the well log on the next slide. But I basically looked for structural highs in the unit to identify traps, as well as did amplitude maps and looked for bright spots that corresponded with our structural highs to indicate the best possible trap. And did that for sandstone 2 as well. Somewhat structural highs, but they correspond to bright spots. So the thicknesses vary in sandstone 1 from 100 feet or 10 to 100 feet, but are capped by 150 foot thick shale. And for sandstone 2 is about 30 to 100 feet. It was sealed by about a 40 to 60 foot shale, depending on where you are in the study area. So the structural trap for sandstone 1, you can see it right here. It's bounded by a bunch of faults. But it's basically bounded by a listric fault and then antithetic fault here. And this corresponds with our structural high that we see there and the bright spot that we saw on the last slide. And so the size for this was about 1.5 kilometers by 1.5 kilometers. It was about 40 meters thick, just based on the well log here. And again, I chose this sandstone because we get high negative SP as well as high resistivity, and we get crossover or deep resistivity to indicate that it's a permeable unit, and it most likely contains hydrocarbons. The reason why it's only not the entire sand body is for the rest of this is the only well where it's a little bit thicker. The rest of the wells, it's about 40 meters thick. And so looking at the turbidites down in the growth strata outside of our well control, looked for kind of what is lobe geometries in our sandstone. So I identified 2 of these horizons, but I picked a trap in T2, which is just the upper turbidite horizon. And this is just a time structure map of that unit. I did an isochron between these 2 just to maybe identify if I could see any highs, and there was a high point in here, so I went and looked at it, and this was, I guess, my trap, and it's just a little preserved stratigraphic high in what is most likely a lobe of the sand deposit, and just in an inline of that, you can see it's sticking up over where the rest of the sand body is lying. And so this trap ended up being about 1.2 kilometers, about 700 meters, and was about 40 milliseconds thick. And ends up being kind of a mixed trap because it's rotated along the listric fault. So for risk assessment, reservoirs, I gave them about a 0.45. We only have SP logs. We don't have any actual rock data, but previous work tells us that these can be viable reservoirs, and they are permeable at least because we have our SP logs indicating that there is some permeability. But we know a lot less about what's in the growth strata and what's in the turbidites. For seals, the entire interval is interbedded, I guess, sandstones and shale layers. So there's a lot of potential along the faults to be sealing. As well, the traps are pretty certain. They're easily identifiable on the 3D seismic and can identify spill points in them. The source rock, now there is no source rock in our region. The closest source rock would be the Wilcox Formation. It's below our salt, but in our study area there are producing wells, so there is a way for the hydrocarbons to get there, and it is a good source rock. I think it has over 2 or 3 TOC. Migration pathways, again, this is a little bit more iffy. It's hard to identify exactly where they are because they go through the salt, and in that area it's just really difficult to identify whether our faults are migrating the hydrocarbons, but because we have fields in play in this study area, there still is a likelihood that they are able to migrate there. And so this gives us a chance of success of 15%, just due to the little information we know about the reservoirs and that there's no obvious migration pathways for the hydrocarbons to get there, but they're most likely mature enough. So in conclusion, we used our 3D seismic cube, our 11 wells, and did a seismic interpretation of the study area. We found faults, flooding surfaces, and salts are all mapped in 3D to help us understand structural geology. There are 3 main listric faults with detachment faulting at the base due to the salt and loading on top. We found 2 sandstone reservoirs within well control with indications of hydrocarbons on the logs as well as possibly in the bright spots. With normal faults, horse normal fault trapping and rollover anticlines that presented one targeting these sandstones to drill. And in the turbidite lobes, we mapped some growth strata that was out of the well control, but there's no direct hydrocarbon indication just due to the overpressures because of the rapid sedimentation. But they do present a good hybrid trap and potentially good reservoir with one proposed drilling target. Just some recommendations, more well data and production history in the area could be really helpful, as well as maybe some analogs for these middle Miocene turbidites would be extremely useful. Core intervals, knowing about the rocks can help a bunch, no matter what. And advanced seismic processing to possibly look below the salt, maybe understand more about our source or more reservoirs down there. And possibly DST to understand pressures and permeabilities in the units that we're looking at. So again, I'd like to acknowledge IPG, Schlumberger, and of course, Olivier and Elena for helping us a lot through all of this. Okay, thanks guys. Questions?
I have
Sure, yeah.
What can be the additional risk to drill for the turbidite sands below the well control? If you suggest other targets?
Probably the biggest risk would be overpressure. And we don't have wells down there, so we can't know exactly what the pressure is, so there's a big risk in drilling down there. That's what I would understand would be the biggest risk in drilling in that region, would be dealing with the overpressures. Okay. And that's, again, why maybe having something analogous that we would know maybe what the overpressure would be in that region to help drill, I guess, when we're doing it.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Guan Wang and I'm going to introduce seismic interpretation of the Louisiana Gulf Coast. And the introduction part, the study area is placed in northern Gulf of Mexico basin. And during the Cenozoic, there are salt driving from the underlying Jurassic salt, and during the displacement province, there are big displacement and some listric growth fault formed and form some very thick deltic sediments which can form good sandstone reservoir. And by 2005, there are approved like 19.8 billion barrels of oil and 181.8 trillion cubic feet of gas. And the data set, we have 3D seismic and 11 wells data with resistivity log and SP log, but we only have one well with DT log, so we can just do well type for this well log. And also because without the check shot, the well type for the whole area maybe not 100% accuracy. And also because the data of the well log data is from 0 millisecond to 3,200 milliseconds. So below that we don't have well data, and the seismic data is like low quality. The workflow, the first will learn the geology framework and petroleum system about the study area. Then I QC check seismic data, well data, and identify hydrocarbons within the sandstone. And then I pick horizons, faults, and make structure maps, amplitude maps, and interpret the structure, tectonic, and find potential reservoir traps. And then I do the risk analysis and give conclusion and recommendations. And after QC seismic data, which is all good, I QC check the well data and SP and resistivity logs and the well top consistency, and this is what I got. And also we can just do one well tie in one well, 1631, because we only get DT log in this well, and this is what I got after QC check. Then for the polarity, we can see that at the right line here, the DT decrease, so velocity increase, and the reflection coefficient is positive here and responds to the peak. So we are under the American polarity, and to determine the lithology, I use SP log, and the sand has lower SP, the shale has higher SP, so we can see that sand responds to the peak and the shale is the trough. And also for the reservoir, I use shallow and deep resistivity log, where I have the big separation and also have the high value of the resistivity log. And after that, I pick all the horizons and 3 maximum flooding surface and 2 reservoir surface at the shallower part, which is 2 pink lines here. And this is another section about. And then I do surface map for the flooding surface, and there are almost all deeping from northwest to southeast, and they are very thick shale, so can act as the seal for a reservoir. And then this is surface map for 2 reservoirs, and you can see that there are some 4-way closure here and some 3-way closure, but have a salt seal another way. So that could be a potential trap place. And then I traced the deeper 2 reservoir and the salt top. And for Martin's question, I use fault and the incoherent seismic pattern to pick the salt. And this is the surface map of the deeper part reservoir and the salt. And we can also see there are some 4-way closure and some 3-way closure and sealed by the fault another way. And then I do the amplitude map. So theoretically, because the sand is corresponding to the peak and the shale to the trough, so the sweet spot in the area should be the dim spot. But actually, in the well that shows we have a hydrocarbon and almost all the traps are bright spot here. So I think that could be because the well tie is not 100% accuracy, or the sand or shale property here is different. And then I pick 23 faults around the whole area, and there are 3 main district faults oriented from northeast to southwest, and some small and static faults that end towards these 3 big faults. And the displacement of faults is become bigger when you go deeper. And also the main salt rocks are under the salt, so we cannot see from the seismic data. But there are evidence show that we have a hydrocarbon in the well, so there could be some faults cut through the salt that act as a pathway for the migration of the hydrocarbons. And then the traps, so I totally find 7 traps in the study area. This is for the shallower part reservoirs. Basically is the high part and have the closure here. And this is for the deeper reservoir and cross sections. And I'll calculate the volume. We can see the traps as the deeper part has high volume than the shallower part. And the risks, the first one is the horizon peak maybe not accuracy because of weak reflection and noise influence that deeper part, and also the well tie is not very good. And the second, the fault picking also can be not accuracy because of weak reflection and low resolution of seismic data at the deeper part. Also, the fault at the shallow part has small displacement, so that could lead to the hydrocarbon leak. And there are some traps parts located outside the seismic data we have, like the R22 and R3. So there has a risk that the hydrocarbon cannot trap outside the part. Although we have the evidence from the well data that R22, we have the hydrocarbon here, but we still can overestimate the size of the trap. And then the overpressure in the deeper part also can be another risk. And this is a conclusion. I find 3 maximizing flooding surface for reservoir horizons and the salt. And then there are 3 millistrict growth faults and some other small faults. And the 3 main faults has better sealing capacity. And also I found totally 3 traps in the reservoir. And then the recommendations. The first one, I think, could expand the working area, obtain more seismic data to fulfill the information of the trap R3, R22. And also we can have some well data about the deeper area that can decrease risk and uncertainty. Also can have some information like situation of the hydrocarbons, so we can estimate the amount of the hydrocarbon in the trap. And also for the lower reservoirs, have much thicker sand body and traps, and also with good sealing. But overpressure here could increase the risk of drilling and production. So we need to do further research and estimate the cost of drilling here to see if it is commercial. And then I want to thank IPG and Sunvisher and Linda and Olivia. So that's all. Thank you.
Good chance, please.
You calculated the thickness of your reservoirs.
Yeah.
What type of velocity did you use? I mean, your seismic was in time, obviously.
Yeah, just actually as the first time I used 1 million seconds to be the thickness. Okay. But the feedback of the homework assignment side we need to calculate too. So I just picked 2 of the wells to see the velocity here and use that to measure the thickness.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hi everyone, my name is Yao Gong, and today I'm going to present the Louisiana Gulf Coast. And here's the principal findings. About the South Rocks, we have the limestone of the Upper Jurassic Smackover Formation, and the Upper Cretaceous Marine Shale, and also the Lower Cretaceous Limestone and the Eocene Wilcox Formation. And the migration pathways are through the faults and also deep reservoir units. And I picked 22 faults, and the reservoirs are the sandstones. And I also found the stratigraphic traps and the structured traps. And the maximum flooding surface can act as the seals. And from the amplitude maps and the well log curves, we can know there is the presence of hydrocarbon. So the objective of this project, we want to find the potential reservoir and the drilling location. So to do that, we need to understand the whole petroleum system. Here's the data sets. We have 3D seismic time, 11 wells, and only 1 well has the DT logs. And we also have 12 well tops. And here is the methods and the workflow. So first, we need to deal with the well log data and verify the sand and shale using the SP curve, and also QC the well top's consistency, and then pick horizontal faults read the paper to know the tectonic history and do the structural interpretation, and also assess the risks and also do the conclusions and the recommendations. Then I'll give you a quick introduction of the background. The progradation and the salt structures control the structural evolution of the northern Gulf of Mexico basin, and the salt structures is the main factor. In most known fields and discoveries in this offshore Gulf of Mexico, hydrocarbons can move from known deep source intervals to young tertiary reservoirs. And the petroleum systems I mentioned before, and also the traps are the rollover anticlines and faults, and seals are the faults and the shale. And here I show some examples about the well top's consistency and also the seismic well type, which is the American polarity. And here, the units can be described as this stratigraphy and the depositional model, shale sand, shale sand, shale sand. The sealing units are the shale about the reservoir and the upper salt. This is what I did about the 3 maximum flooding surfaces, and they can act as the seals in the petroleum systems. And these are the reservoir surfaces, and you can see the separation between the low and high resistivity, and show it's a permeable zone, and also can show maybe there's the presence of hydrocarbon. And this is the turbidized surfaces. Because the salt, the resolution of here is very bad, so use the cosine map can reduce the error and show clearly of the turbidized. And here's the soft map. Shows the ups and downs of the salt surface. And here's the amplitude map of 2 reservoirs. And you can see the circles with the high amplitude and also, oh, what happened? Oh, the amplitude maps. And this well is from here. And with the separation I mentioned before, so I can know here we have the hydrocarbons. And this is what I did for the faults. I picked 22 faults, and this is the 3D model. And the blue one, the green one, and the pink one are the main 3 listric faults. The faults can act as traps and also can act as the migration pathways. And this cross-section shows the 8 surfaces I picked. And you can see the blue one, green one, and the pink one. They are the 3 main listric faults. And this the structure traps, the rollover anticline, and the stratigraphic traps, which is the turbidized. And here's the assessment of risks. The presence of salt reduces the resolution of the seismic, and the faults can be good seal or lead to leaks, destroy the good petroleum system. And also, SP curve is not reliable when you have our very small contrast, because between formation water salinity and mud filtrate salinity can result in no to small SP deflection. And here's come to the conclusions. I picked 22 faults and also the petroleum systems. The salt depots mainly control the structural evolution of the northern Gulf of Mexico basin. And here's my recommendations. Here is my potential drilling target with the anticline and the good sealed shale. More well logs can give more information, so it can be helpful to the integration based. And also, better seismic data with better resolution can help to recognize the phase and the structure. And here's the references. And I want to thank to the IPG and petroleum industry companies for the IBA data. Thanks to the Scambergy software and license, and thanks to Professor Elena and Olivia. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question. On one of your, where you were recommending the location, and then you had the well log after. Can you go to that slide? No, not in your recommendation. When you had your amplitude maps. So it looks like your resistivities are really low there. You do have the separation indicating it could be permeable. But
Yes, and also the amplitude map is high amplitude.
But your resistivities are fairly low.
Yeah.
That's my question. My question is why do you think that there's hydrocarbon presence there?
Because the saturation of this part, I think is permeable zones and also the high amplitude. So I just guess maybe there is the presence of hydrocarbon.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. What's the next one?
I'm upright. It's my turn. All right, hi everyone. My name is Darren Hiscott. I'll be presenting to you today on the Taranaki Basin of New Zealand. So this project was primarily a seismic hydrocarbon reconnaissance mission, very exploration oriented. We have very few wells and limited seismic data. So this is located off of the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand, and like I said, we had 29 2D seismic lines, 13 wells with resistivity gamma ray logs, some with sonic and porosity logs. So we analyzed this 2D seismic data, scrolled through the seismic lines to find potential traps and potential hydrocarbon accumulations. So just going into some tectonic background of this area, it's gone through many phases, as we can see on this area. It's gone from early rifting in the Cretaceous through to passive margin to a convergent boundary with subduction zone where these volcanoes started forming. So we're going to have some volcanics in here. And then inversion into another rift approximately 5 million years ago. And this basin is filled with approximately 11 kilometers thick in its deepest areas of sediment. So I left out a lot of the quality control of the seismic as it's more of an interpretation project, but I showed the flattening of the seabed here. We can see the top one is our original, and we can see some push-down structures here due to our lateral velocity variations due to these deep sea trenches. So after flattening, I used 1800 milliseconds, which seemed to be the best number. We can see that these horizons here are flattened out compared to this push down here, sorry. And using higher amplitude or flattening on 2200, for example, we started to see pull up on these horizons. So I also did some mist tie analysis, tied our synthetics to our wells, but I left out that data here and stuck to the interpretation part. So our source rocks, the main source rocks I looked at were the Wanui, which is has about 1% TOC, but has ranges up to 60%. So it's not the greatest, but it does act as a source in the area. And the Rakopi Formation, which is one of the main source rocks for the Taranaki Basin, has TOCs greater than 3%, and they range from 2 to 75%. And it is a mixed gas and oil prone source rock. I got all these numbers from literature. Obviously, you can't really get it from seismic data. And we can see them here in one area that I picked. This is actually right in here on our seismic lines. And this purplish line is our Rakopi Formation, and this light blue would be our Wanui Formation. And now looking at our reservoirs, I was looking more for reservoirs up in this area. This is actually on this line here, not that yellow line. I was looking more areas outside of where we have our main fields. As it's more of an exploration project, I wanted to look away from where we had our well data. And so looking at our reservoirs, the main reservoirs I looked at were the Tane or Farewell. They're very similar. One is just the Tane is more up here, and our Farewell will be in our deeper areas. This has porosities of about 20% and permeabilities in the several hundreds millidarcies. Again, I got these numbers from the literature. And then another one I looked at was the North Cave Formation, which will be our pink one here. It has porosities of 26% and up to over 500 millidarcies in permeability. Keep in mind, these numbers are all from areas where we do have well data, and I'm primarily looking up in these areas here. So there is some questionability of is the reservoir still good up in these areas. So another reservoir I picked was the Moki Sand. It was not present up in these areas, but just to show that I did pick it, this is over down in here. It will be our dark blue line here. It's up to 26% porosities and variable permeabilities, so typically around 100 millidarcies. So our main structural horizons I picked. So these are steady structural horizons, such as our seafloor here, which I picked. And again, I guess I have my line over top, but I use the seafloor to determine the polarity. We're going to have a great increase in density going from the water to our rock. And this turned out as a peak, so I determined it as American Standard Polarity. And another structural horizons we picked was these volcanics in here, as well as our basement up down at the bottom there. So faults, there's many faults as I talked about in the tectonic history. There's a lot of early Cretaceous rifting, which would coincide with these basement faulting in here. And then in these, the compressional and into our inversion stage, we have some possible flower structures here. I say possible because typically with flower structures, you expect the faults to steepen as we get to a depth, and these ones don't seem to. In other areas, which I'll see on another slide, they do tend to steepen at depth, so could call those ones flower structures. But yeah, so these are forming in the time of our compression and inversion, and then we do have some more normal faulting up here, which could be related to the later rifting. These faults, I guess, the basement faults here, these ones have a range of about 50 to 150 milliseconds of offset, but when we get into the deeper part of the basin over here, it gets deep very quickly. These faults have offsets of up to 600 milliseconds. So looking at some potential structural and stratigraphic traps, looking at the structural ones, dominantly along the faults, there can be some traps along the basement faulting as well as within these potential flower structures here. And these, actually looking at this trap here, it was approximately 3.6 kilometers wide and about 400 milliseconds tall through the entire trap. And since we only have 2D data, I'm not too sure about the closure of this trap, so it can't really talk much about its lateral extent because we don't really know. And then, so a stratigraphic trap, it's technically a stratigraphic trap. I wouldn't expect to find any accumulations in there, but we can see this Tane member pinching out here, which is forming that stratigraphic trap underneath this Turi Formation shales or carbonaceous mudstones above. So, a potential area that I thought we could drill is in this, one of these flower structures. This is on a different line, so this is actually up here. Okay, yeah, this is up there as well. And we can see that these faults are starting to steepen at a depth. So I picked this area because we can see some amplitude changes at the edges. This is a sand. If there is potential hydrocarbons, we'd expect it to be dimmer. But this could also just be to faulting and just the rock being really broken up. So the risks, I have a reservoir at 0.7. We know that these reservoirs are there, the Tane and the Farewell, from other wells, but I dropped it down to about 0.7 because we're pretty sure, but we don't know the reservoir quality in these areas. Source rock, I put at 0.6. This could be pretty optimistic, but because we are in shallower areas, these source rocks may not be mature here. But as we move from here to areas in here, it gets quite a bit deeper, and there's possible migration for these hydrocarbons up to this reservoir. Traps, I put at 0.5, again, just because the trapping structure is there, but I guess this kind of goes in with the seal as well, but they are extensively faulted, and it may not be a great trap. And that's why I put seals at 0.3 with this faulting. We don't know if they're sealing faults. We don't know if these hydrocarbons would be able to migrate of those out of those traps. And then migration pathway 0.4, again, because we really don't have a lot of data in this area other than the seismic, no well control. The source rocks are deeper as we move away from this area, but we don't know for sure if there's a good migration pathway. So in total, it's about 2.5% chance of success, which is close to what you would expect for an exploration project, if not higher. And so to conclude, we had extensive rifting in the Cretaceous, forming these basement faults, and later possible transpressional tectonics forming these flower structures, which make some possible traps for hydrocarbon accumulations. And then our direct hydrocarbon indicators are not obvious, but we can see some amplitude changes around these possible structures, which may indicate something. But I think further exploration with shooting 3D seismic, or even just drilling a well to help get some more data in this area can help give us more evidence for prospective targets. So again, I'd like to thank Olivier, Alina, and everyone for the help, and IBA for their data sets, and all their sponsors, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
I have a question. What would be the time of the formation of the flower structures, which you detected on the site?
Okay, yeah, those would be like in that rifting stage. It was in the late Paleocene to early Miocene.
Which unit do they affect?
They affect up into, sorry, I can show that, I didn't mention that. So they affect into the Tame and into like part of the Turi member above.
Yeah, Turi is in the age.
That is, oh, I wasn't entirely sure, Miocene of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they can be Paleocene.
Hmm?
They can be Paleocene. If they affect Turi, they have to have happened later, right?
Yeah. Then, sorry, what? Sorry, I didn't understand what you're saying.
What the time of formation of flower structure? If they affect Turi, and Turi is Miocene, what is the age? You said it's Paleogene. It can be Paleogene because they affect Miocene units, right?
Yeah, well, the lower ones were Paleogene, but the upper one was early Miocene.
Yeah. So they formed after that, right?
They formed in this area during the Miocene, right? Yeah.
So it's not
drifting. It's inversion tectonic plates.
Oh, I didn't say those were from the rifting. Or if I did, I didn't mean to say that those were from rifting. Those are compressional structures. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So the last one.
Yeah, you got to do this.
Yeah, you get a better view like I'm mostly just stretching. We've all lost our mind. That is fun.
Right, one more. You can do it. 10 more minutes.
So let's start the last presentation. Danny, please.
Yeah. One more presentation about Louisiana Gulf. So actually this is the section. And this question of surface, we talked about this, and we can see, by the way, there is a salt, and this is irregular reflections compared to the sedimentary strong reflectors. So just to point out. So that's important. Gulf of Mexico basin located just between the USA, Cuba, and Mexico. Tectonically, it's divergent margin. Survived mainly two stages. The first one was rifting stage, and till the present, it's thermal subsidence. So this is not interesting. This is not interesting. Data set and methodology. So we had 11 wells with several well logs, delta T, SP resistivity, sonic logs. What else? We had one well with no, we didn't have check shots here. So you can see, sorry, on this map, by the way, you can see the location of the basin. So what we did, what I did first, I analyzed the well logs and I identified the potential hydrocarbons reservoirs on the well logs using the difference in the resistivity. You can see, by the way, there is a high resistivity and some curves expansion, and this is also, by the way, this high resistivity. You can see the highest part of the reservoir is, we can assume it's productive. Regarding amplitudes, by the way, we can see this. It's not no. I will say later about the amplitudes. QC seismic and well data. What is interesting here? Nothing interesting. I just used trace AGC attribute, which helps me to view the seismic in better resolution. So not better resolution, but higher, better quality picture, because I increase the amplitudes when you trace AGC attribute. What is important I did first is I reconsidered several well logs, and I found that for me it was like I first met when I see the fault and I see a well, but I don't have a fault in well. So I went to the well log and I identified, I recorrelated the several well, and I found actually the fault here. It's about 357 feet, and then the same. If we convert the time to depth, we get the same. It actually precisely jumped on my picture when I put it here. What else? Said a lot about this. So regarding stratigraphy, we have four main reservoirs: Calovian, Cotton Valley, Houston, and Woodbine. Woodbine is the most important and proven production here. Source rock is Cameridian shale here. I did when I interpreted, actually, I didn't use this map when I did my interpretation. I just put my faults in this map and just precisely lay down this map. So just can control my interpretation, fault interpretation. Regarding fault, by the way, regarding fault interpretation, I identified three main system of faults depending on the time of their appearing. So the ancient one and the youngest one, these are two big normal faults. We can see they have the highest amplitude, but there goes even almost to tertiary period. The second system related to the salt movement, we have classic cone structure above the salt. Here this also, and the third system is which has 40 milliseconds displacement. It's like second by it's like second young because we have this. This is the youngest faults. But they don't penetrate the deeper sections. So during the work, I built a bunch of maps for maximum for shales, maximum flooding surfaces. You can see these maps. Then I built for reservoir, also several maps. What is, by the way, this is reservoir horizon 6, one of the deepest horizons, and I built a map. It's not an amplitude map; it's an extracted value. It gives it's almost the same, but it gives you all the values along the reflector. So it's more detailed map. And then I found here just precisely trapped fault, just trap with a high values for the amplitudes. This is high amplitudes. We can see this not so detailed as the extracted values made, but repeats, but not in the good values. So I did also extracted value for the reservoir horizon 2. We can see also potential zones here. This is highest amplitudes. Then this is a map for turbidites for deeper horizons. We can see the anticline structure, like combined trap actually, with a normal fault, and the guys actually drilled in correct way, but they didn't drill to this depth. What is interesting on this? This is the deepest one, like below the turbidites, and we can see it reminds like pure fluvial system, a lot of channelized. This you can see it from the places. What else? This is the salt. This is the salt map. One of the stages was generation of synthetic, and when I generated synthetic, I noticed that like we have a high amplitudes actually not in the sandstone, but we have the amplitudes work usually on the difference when we have something strong and something like when we go from the hard to the soft rock. That's why we have. So I wouldn't say, and also Sheriff and Geldart say in the book that amplitudes show us a difference between the hard and soft, so that they should just display the contact, just transition between. What else? You see on these pictures we can see the conformity on the turbidites. I think it might be related to the subaerial conformity. And the last stage was forecast, traps forecast, and I make my proposed well in this. I just told you, and this trap is 99%. It will be a new field. There is even a closure here, and yes, we can see what is going on here, but we purely can see by fault the high amplitude. So something accumulated here, and we can see this on this section. There is a high values. What else? So to diminish uncertainty in interpretation, I would recommend if it's possible to provide a 3D seismic, or at least we should have one check shot of vertical seismic profiling, because was a lot of doubts when playing with these synthetic seismograms. So I definitely did a check shot in this territory to be sure what we are doing. The conclusions. So several potentials traps. I found several potential traps. Studied the history of the Gulf of Mexico basin, and what else? And that's it. What I would recommend, yeah, if we would have 3D seismic to make a impedance and then make a propagation of the porosities, permeabilities, build all the maps to see the for the future drilling. And references, and thank to Elena Olivier, the help and expertise, and for Petrel software. It should be I think it should be a little bit better. It should be pretty heavy. Pretty heavy. It's opinion of software engineers, 5 years experience.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell me, please, your recommendation is do the acoustic impedance Q estimation?
Yeah.
So what do you need for that?
What do you mean? What's that?
What do
we
you
need to
need?
have.
What do you need to do that?
We need to have 3D seismic first.
You have it.
Good job. Sorry, I'm maybe tired. Yeah, because yesterday I worked all the night. Taranaki still died to decide.
Okay, other question? You think about that and let me know later. Okay.
Yes.
Other questions? No, thank you. No, thank you very much.